So this is a general theory video about layout and camera. And as an animator, you might think that camera is really a problem for live action filmmaking, but it's just as important in animation as it is in live action. And the thing about camera is what we really call it in animation is layout, the layout department. And the head of layout is really the equivalent job of the cinematographer or director of photography on a live action film. And it's incredibly important to have a good head of layout on any animated film because that's really where you're telling the story shot by shot. And cameras do tell the story. It's one of the most important skills in filmmaking and incredibly important to master. So we must not neglect the camera when we animate. Here are some examples of shots that are involved in the storytelling process. And most people are vaguely familiar with these terms, having watched a bit of, or film has been around for a long time now, so we're mostly familiar with the concept of a wide shot, an establishing shot, a mid shot, a close-up, an extreme close-up, and as an and an insert. But what I'm going to do is go through these concepts and just make sure that we know exactly what they all are. So an establishing shot is the establishing shot of the whole scene. And you typically see this at the beginning of a sequence when the cameraman is focusing on a wide shot of the area in order to set the scene for the audience. It's really about setting the scene and telling the audience where we are. A master shot is really a live action term, and it's a recording of an entire scene from an angle that keeps all the characters in plain view. And what this means is that because the studio has shot the master, they can then go ahead and cut away to inserts, close-ups, mid-shots, whatever. But the studio always knows, or the filmmakers always know, that they can come back to the master shot if they need to. So say if you don't like a close-up or if you don't like an insert, there's always you can go back to the master and you know you'll have the coverage you need. That's what's meant by coverage, is the master shot has been shot from start to finish. The wide shot, in this case seabirds on a rock, is, as everybody really knows, the whole scene. So it's basically you're showing everything, similar to an establishing shot. It just means you're including all the objects in the scene. A medium shot tends to be anything from sort of mid-thigh upwards and tends to show the full figure, like these two gentlemen here. Here's a close-up. We've got three kinds of close-ups: medium close-up, and extreme close-up. So this would be this would be a medium close-up, and on a script you'll see this written as MCU. It's sort of halfway between a mid-shot and a close-up. Usually the subject's head and shoulders. That's a medium close-up. Then here, close-up on Rembrandt, and now the head takes up the whole frame. And then you can have an extreme close-up where you go in, maybe just the eyes are visible and nothing else. And that would be called an ECU or XCU on a film script. So let's go to some other shots. Here's a two-shot, basically just two people in view, and often used to show the emotional state between these two individuals here. An insert. What's an insert? An insert is where you're cutting away. James Bond is trying to save the world. The planet's about to explode. The nuclear weapons are about to launch. You cut to the clock. The clock, of course, would have some wires and a stick of dynamite attached to it or something like that. That's an insert. You're cutting away from the master shot or the close-up. You're going to an insert of the clock. What about a cutaway? That's a slightly different, similar to an insert, but slightly different. So it's defined as the interruption of a continuously filmed action by inserting a view of something else. So, for example, in the old horror films, you didn't want to show the axe actually chopping somebody's head off. Nowadays you would. But once upon a time, that was considered bad manners. So you'd have a view of the axe being swung through the air, then you'd cut away to a close-up of the actor, and then cut back to the head on the ground. So a cutaway is you're interrupting the action to look at something else. Here are some examples of inserts. Going to a close-up of the gunfighter, then you might have an insert of the hand quivering on the holster, cut to a two-shot of his friends watching anxiously, and then an insert of the town clock ticking, perhaps. A POV shot. This is, in this case, it simply stands for point of view. And in this case, the POV, this is obviously from the POV of someone who's fallen over or passed out and is peering up at all the concerned people looking down at him. Let's talk a little bit about camera style. Camera styles can be very, very different. Jacques Tati, famous French filmmaker, who tended to use the camera as an observer. He shot everything in wide shot. Almost no close-ups in the whole film. Very detached style. And if you look at Sylvain Chomet's film, The Illusionist, it's shot in almost exactly the same way. There are no close-ups in that film. It's all filmed wide to reproduce Jacques Tati's style of filmmaking. Then there's the handheld camera. That's literally a camera in the operator's hands, not on a tripod. So that's going to be very, very shaky kind of filmmaking. This was pioneered in France. They called it cinéma vérité. And it's in contrast to really the Hollywood style of filmmaking, which tends to be very, very smooth. You know, Panavision pioneered those long dollies, those swooping camera shots on rails. Generally speaking, as a filmmaker, you want to avoid a jump cut. And a jump cut is where you have two sequential shots, say this boy here in the car in shot A, and then in shot B. These two shots are almost exactly the same. And so you get a jump between the two. So basically, you don't want to go from a close-up to another close-up because it will appear to jump. But you could go from a close-up to a wide shot, and that would be fine. Nowadays, people use these kind of cuts in filmmaking all the time. You see it in adverts a lot. You see deliberate jump cuts in order to grab the audience's attention and prevent you from going away to make a cup of tea. But in filmmaking, we usually try to avoid it, unless you have some deliberate reason to do it. Now, one thing in animation that we want to do is generally avoid long shots, mainly because they're very, very hard to render. And in live action, it's also, you're well advised to avoid long shot, largely because they're very, very complicated to do. This is, if you watch the beginning of Orson Welles' great masterpiece, A Touch of Evil, you'll see the beginning shot is incredibly complex choreography, one very, very long shot. Very, very hard to do. Beautiful if you can pull it off. Technically very difficult. Robert Altman pays tribute to it in The Player, and he has all these characters actually talking about how terrible filmmaking is. It's just cut, cut, cut. And in fact, the whole shot is one very, very, very long shot. But in animation, we don't like them because they're complex, they get heavy, the render times get long. It's generally advisable to try and avoid them if you can. Let's talk a little bit about the theory of montage. Now, there's two ways in which the word montage is used. The first is the sequential juxtaposition of uninflected images to tell a story. And that's really storytelling through camera. You know, cut to a man at a bus stop, cut to a man looking at his watch, cut to an empty street, no bus coming. You know, you're telling the story of the man waiting at the bus stop without without words. You're just using images. And what is meant by uninflected images is the images are just plain. It's just a man at a bus stop, it's a watch, it's an empty street. We know there's no bus coming. But it's also used, and this is the more common usage of the term, to suggest the passage of time. And the classic montage sequence is the Rocky training sequence in the Rocky movie, where we see Sylvester Stallone training, and it's cut to music. And that's what mostly people talk about montage nowadays. And it was pioneered by Sergei Eisenstein, or the first meaning of it, the sequential juxtaposition of uninflected images to tell a story. That's Eisenstein's theory. The collision of independent shots. And really what you're trying to do is you're trying to use the camera to tell the story, which is very relevant for animation because we like to show things as far as we can. And here's the Rocky training sequence, the second meaning of the term. Okay, let's talk about visual continuity, or the 180-degree rule. And this is also called crossing the line. And this is a reasonably complicated concept. And actually, in order that this video doesn't run too long, I'm going to stop this now, and then in part 2, we'll go into this in a bit more detail.